Driller Chris here, and I want to talk about a very important thing. A very important thing you guys really need when you're doing turbo 4AGs or 7AGs, because a lot of you blow up the motors, spin bearings, and unaware of one of the littlest things that people overlook is oil temperature and viscosity. You know, it drops as the motor gets really hot. Okay, another thing is, if you guys want to know what I'm using, there you go. That's an Innovate. It gives you the temperature of the oil, which you run a sensor to your oil pan, and one sensor to the oil pump, which tells me the pressure. So it's two-stage. It does two things, it's two functions: oil temp, oil pressure, which is very important because 4Gs get really hot. And you know, a lot of you guys around there, no oil coolers. You know, 1030, 1040, on boost, driving around, get hot, oil thins out. You know, people say, oh, oil doesn't thin out. It does. It loses viscosity. If you have a pressure gauge like this, you would see the oil pressure drop as you're daily driving. It drops very dramatically too. I mean, I've had 1030 in this car with the turbo running through, no oil cooler, just cruising, and within 10-12 miles my oil pressure was down into the 9 psi idle and going down into motors almost about to knock. So, you know, a couple E-Series guys emailed me too, you know, blowing up motors, and I asked them if they had oil pressure gauge, if they had oil cooler, or if their turbo's water cooled, which I recommend is water cooling your turbo, because that oil does pass through it. And people tell you, oh, it doesn't make a big difference. It makes a huge difference if you have a oil pressure gauge and temperature gauge. You would see the oil temperature stay a little more stable if your turbo is water cooled, which I always recommend. Just like a factory cars, they come water cooled because oil passes through that hot housing, which gets up to 1,000 degrees if you're beating on it, you know. So it's good to have that. Now, if you're wondering where I run it, as you can see right down here, I have a fitting. Drop something. I have a fitting there, connects into, which is the sensor for the oil pressure gauge. So that runs around up and through here and to the gauge itself. So you need that. You know, I recommend that so you can always be aware of your oil pressure, because a lot of people don't even pay attention to that, and they're not even aware of the oil pressure. Now, quick thing, water cooling lines, another thing that goes to my turbo. If you want to know how I ran it, my feed is here. It comes from what used to be the water pump, the thermostat housing. My feed comes here, goes to the turbo, which is down over here, and it comes out and back into the head, the hot side, which goes back into the water pump and out to the radiator. Very important things to have on 4AGs and 7AG setups. Very important, you know. So please be aware of that. Get those oil pressure gauges and temperature gauges, because your oil will thin out if you're running thin oils. Me, I run 20-50, and I'm racing, you know, I go straight 50 weight. That's just me. My bearings are set up like that. They're an extra thousandths bigger than stock, so I'm always clear, extra insurance. And the 20-50 and the 50 weight take way longer to lose viscosity and thin out. You can see in the oil pressure gauge, they stay for hours compared to the 1030, which driving up the street just thins out. But like I said, a big, very important thing is the water cooling lines have helped my oil pressure stay up 10-12 psi higher all day, compared to, you know, not having the water cooling lines to the turbo. So that's another note. Back into the car. Like I said, please get yourself, you guys, get Innovate or AEM, get the oil temp with the oil pressure, you know, together combo, something. It's worth it. The $180, $200, it's really worth it, because it will save your butt, you know, especially if you're running thin oil and an oil cooler. Whereas me, I don't have an oil cooler. I run heavy oil, but I'm not beating on all day like some of you guys. I'm not a track racer. I'm just a highway drag racer. Do a couple pulls, 2 races, maybe the most, and I shut her down or pull over and drive slow. And then I let her cool, and I watch the oil pressure go back up. And then, okay, she's cool, I'll go for another run. I'm not circuit racing, so that's just my excuse not to have oil cooler, which I will be doing, because I'm starting to drive this car around a lot more than I normally do. So that's just something I need to pick myself up to. But thanks guys for listening, and remember, oil pressure gauge, oil temp gauge. I don't want to see any more bearings spun. Everybody comment up, oh, my bearings keep spinning. You know, do you have oil cooler? No. Do you have water cooled turbo? No. Do you have oil pressure gauge? No. So please get those, all right?